The window was black as the void, just like every day. It always caught my eye on the way home from work. Although I knew it was better not to look, I couldn't help myself. When I got inside, I stood in front of the door, as I did most days, eyes locked on the handle but not daring to open it. I wanted to. By God, I wanted to. I wanted to open the door and turn the lights on and be done with it. I wanted to stop this room from making the whole house feel darker. I just couldn't. I didn't have it in me. That's how it had gone, day after day, year after year. The room had not always been dark. Actually, once sunlight would stream through the single large window, making the room shine to all walking past. That was before it settled in. I began hearing noises. First, they were small, scuttering and scratching, like rats or bugs. Over time, the light in the room began to fade until it became the pitch black that it remained for so long, until it started to leak out. I noticed a dripping sound. Leaky ceilings and pipes sprung to mind, but it didn't take very long to find the source. There was a black spot on the wall next to the door of the room. It wasn't much bigger than a coin, and sound itself was owed to a black liquid occasionally falling from it in little droplets. The liquid was hitting the floor and had pooled into a small puddle. As I watched the droplets fall and feed the puddle, I noticed they were not immediately absorbed, as you would see with water. Instead, they sat on top of the pool for a moment until, after a pause, they were snatched inside the greater body. The image made my stomach turn. Although I didn't know what type of substance this was, I knew that it must be carrying the same darkness that engulfed the room. Until this point, I had been safe with just leaving the door firmly shut. Now, it seemed that such physical barriers were no longer enough to keep that darkness contained. Suddenly, I heard something else, a second drip. I could see it then, not far away from the first leak, but further up the wall. It fell not far from the first pool. It wouldn't be long until the two pools met. My skin felt cold. I felt my breathing get faster, and small beads of sweat start to pool on my brow. I took a step back. I didn't want to take my eyes off them, but I also didn't want to be here any longer. I took another step back. The two dripping leaks looked like the malformed eyes of a predator. I thought if I moved too fast that it might pounce. Another step back. A third dripping sound now came, disrupting the predictable rhythm of the first two. I couldn't see where this one was coming from, though. I froze. I thought backing away could be making it worse, making the predator angrier. I couldn't go forward either, so I just stopped and waited. It was then I saw the liquid seeping out from the bottom of the doorway into the room. My house was getting wetter and darker, and as it did, the life and soul within began to depart. The dripping began to get more regular as more and more spots began to form and join in the chorus. The sound started to get faster until there were dozens of steady streams running black tar onto my floor like unchecked sewer pipes. I sensed what was coming, so turned on my heel and tried to flee. I had just taken my first step when I heard the sound of a door opening behind me. It was not the bursting open of a door swung open by the pressure of a torrent of liquid, but the rattle of a handle followed by the slow creak of unused hinges. Next came the heavy and deliberate rumble of something moving heavily and quickly across my floor and right towards me. I could hear my heart beating in my ears as I took off in a sprint. Whatever unnatural force pursued me, it was fast, lumbering after me with frightful speed. I needed to get out of that house, this much I knew. As hard as I ran towards my front door, it got closer and closer, and the more distant my escape felt. My house had not been this big before, I was sure of it. However, my certainty seemed not to matter very much in that moment. It was like I was running towards a goal that did not want to be reached, that would not let me catch up. Suddenly, I felt something cold and wet completely wrap around my torso and lock me in place. I stopped trying to run. I just froze again, a deer waiting for the impact, waiting for whatever would happen next. I could hear it breathing in my ear. It was like the strained wheezing of breath almost completely obstructed by phlegm. It popped and crackled as it drew closer and closer to my face. Now that I was caught, whatever presence this was didn't seem to be in much of a hurry. I felt the pressure around my middle increase as it started to squeeze. The bulking mass behind me pressed up against my back. Then I felt its moist substance running over my shoulders. The rest of my body followed, around my waist, my legs, and between fingers. Finally, violently, and without warning, it pulled me back, and I was enveloped completely inside it. It was a strange feeling, both weightless and heavy. My body felt numb from the shock, which until then had kept me frozen. Unfortunately, the shock was starting to wear off, and the reality of it all dawned on me. I felt everything then. My skin felt hot and cold simultaneously, burning and freezing in equal measure. The being's insides were pulsating and bubbling across every tiny part of my body. I couldn't breathe, as the thick and oozing matter around me would not even let me expel my breath through my nose. When I felt myself fading, I focused all my effort into forcing my mouth open. I did this not to breathe, but to scream. However, instead of letting out my terror, I let it in instead. It was like drowning in a pit of tar. Hot, cold matter entered every orifice on my face in a gushing stream, relentlessly filling my insides with its darkness. I was throwing up in reverse. My ears, like sand, was being forced deep inside. My eyes, like they were being shredded by 1,000,000 tiny diamond shards. It was torture of the worst kind. The ordeal, however, was only just beginning. Just as the discomfort and pain was at its crescendo, I began to fade from reality. At first, I found myself praising whatever gods were listening that my body could not be turned against me anymore. It was a respite against the torment, which had already passed the point of being unbearable. What took its place, though, was worse than tangible things like pain. Initially, it was just a whisper. It was hardly perceptible, but quickly grew in its volume and harshness. It spoke with words, although not those of any earthly language. It told me of my uselessness, my burden to the world, and that I would be better off dead. Although unpleasant to hear, they are something else when felt. Before long, it was as though daggers were scratching the very core of my mind, the essence of my being. Every disembodied flick of its tongue burned deeper and deeper into me. It was scratching away at me, one alien syllable at a time. It didn't take long for me to start begging to return to mere physical pain. I'm not sure how I was able to endure this depraved onslaught, but somehow I did not give in. I did not, and still don't, consider myself a strong man, but despite my own expectations, I did not surrender. It would have been so easy to just succumb to the madness and let myself slip away. I very nearly did. Right when the whispers and pain could not get any worse, I felt myself snap. I was no longer a version of myself I could recognize. I was separated from myself, and although that pain was still very real, I felt removed from it in some way. The human mind can only take so much, and this was the equivalent of curling up into a shell and hoping it did not shatter under the force of the assault. In any other situation, I suppose the above would sound worrying. Rest assured, though, because it was my loss of sanity that, in a way, actually saved me from my own desire to give in. I could not want any more. I could not do much of anything except grip the metaphorical rope under the downpour of the mightiest waterfall I could imagine. This went on for some time, but how much I could not say. All I know is that against the thunderous roar of the entity's barrage, everything gradually faded to white. I mean that in a literal sense. The darkness that surrounded me started an imperceptible shift that I only realized when the sensation was blinding. With that light, so too did the mountainous noise of the entity fade to a whisper and then to nothing at all. And that was it for some time. Total nothingness, total numbness. I was just a speck suspended in the total void. It sounds bizarre to say now, but there was a comfort in that nothingness that I will never forget. I felt like I had done it. I had won. That would not be so accurate to say. The reality is that I had done the only thing I could do. I had weathered the storm. The next thing I saw was the image of my old and unvarnished wooden floors against the backdrop of my open front door, light pouring through it and lighting up the dim surroundings. It felt like the worst hangover I could ever have, punishing me for a night out I didn't get the chance of having. My bones ached, my eyes twitched, and my skin felt like it was on a body too big. I let out a raspy moan and tried to collect myself, but that proved difficult. Through more than a bit of willpower, I forced myself to sit upright and steadied myself on my arms. That was when, also like a terrible morning after, the day's events came flooding back to me. My stomach lurched, and I felt something needed to be expelled from the depths of my core. Instinctively, I shut my eyes, opened my mouth to my side, and let it all out. Although not quite painful, it certainly wasn't pleasant. It went on for some time, and just when I thought it was all out, I would heave again and begin the process anew. Finally, when I had nothing more to give, I remained perched on locked arms, which had thankfully not given way. I could feel my expulsion pooled around my hands, and I did not want to open my eyes to deal with what came next. I took my time and opened them when I was ready. Bile as black as midnight. It was all around me. It seemed to bubble and shudder of its own accord. I could not stand it. I struggled to my feet and started to run. I ran as fast as I could right out of that house, and I did not look back, no matter how far out of sight it was. Despite my weakness and state of filth, I kept going. I ran and ran until I reached the home of some family who were kind enough to take me in without asking too many questions, even though I'm sure they were burning to ask. I stayed with them for some time. I couldn't go back. There was no way. Eventually, I made up a story about sewerage and some leaky pipes. It seemed to satisfy their worry. Although I'm sure they didn't completely believe me, they kept any more questions to themselves and let me move on as best I could, learning to keep any mention of the house out of their mouths. It never strayed too far from my mind, in any case. Eventually, I moved out and into an apartment. The house was paid off. I didn't need to worry about it. I thought about selling it, but that would have meant dealing with it directly, perhaps even being asked to see it, and I couldn't have handled that. No. Instead, I just left it there, decaying year after year. At some points, I even forgot it existed. Even so, without fail, every couple of months, I would cough up some more black bile. It always seemed to happen when I had just forgotten about it. There it would be again. It doesn't happen anymore. It hasn't for quite some time. I'm thankful of that. Last month, I was walking absent-mindedly. There was a song playing in my headphones, and my eyes started following a bird. The unconscious smile on my face dropped like a lead weight when the small creature flew over the same house I had tried so hard to forget for so long. As it set itself down on the roof, totally ignorant of the terror that lay inside, I felt my chest tighten. My breathing picked up, and I could feel my heart start to pound that terrible yet familiar beat. I felt the urge to run, just as I had all those years ago, but something stopped me. I caught sight of that window, the same one that had been ever so bright so long ago. It was still dark as it had been, yet something was different. Dimly, I could see the shadow of something waving from the windowsill. For a split second, I thought it was the darkness, waving and beckoning its escaped prey to return back to its clutches. It, on closer inspection, was something entirely unexpected. I could see the unmistakable silhouette of a stem, leaves, and a halo of petals subtly moving from side to side against the cool day's breeze. It was a flower, very much alive, which had not been there before. I could not make heads or tails of where it had come from or what it was doing there, but there was one thing I could be completely sure of. The darkest room in my house was now just a little bit brighter.